we're getting pretty damn close to the collapse of America. Almost like it feels like America's this big ripe apple, and it's being eaten by the worms from inside of it, and that apple can be plucked at any time by the radical left. Ever since I was a kid, I had been raised conservative, and a lot of the LGB community who I speak to, they're always bothered by that. They're always bothered. They always think, well, your parents must have rejected you. Your parents must have hated you. They must have despised you and disowned you and thrown you out to the street or something like that. It couldn't be further from the truth. It's generally the radical creationist Christians who do that type of thing. Christians I have found in my experience to be far more agreeable people, far more sweet, caring, charitable people, and they, even though they might not approve of certain aspects about me, they still love me and they still care about me. And so when I wound up actually coming out to my parents, I figured that they would disown me because of the lies that I was told by the radical left. And my mother and father actually said, now you need us more than ever, and we forbid you to leave. I wound up leaving the house because I thought that I needed a break, because all of my friends were from church and nobody would see me the same way. And it didn't feel, I had a bad case of cognitive dissonance, because as I tried to leave the house and leave the more conservative-minded people and entered into the blandishments of the LGBT community, I had a bad case of cognitive dissonance, because it turns out that the LGBT community are the ones who are intolerant. The left are the people who are intolerant. And it didn't make any sense to me at all. And I was also, at the time, I had done some work for the Grassroots Campaign, a very far left radical group. And I had been doing some things for a friend who was working in the Grassroots Campaign. And so what was happening, since I come from Colorado Springs, it's a fairly conservative town. I didn't realize that till I got older, but what would happen was I would go up to Denver, big, beautiful town, but the people were shit. People were absolutely reprehensible to each other. There's no friendliness, there's no neighborliness, and they're always peevish and resentful people. They're very, very mean, militant people. But then I would come down to Colorado Springs, which is one of the most boring cities in the U.S., because there's almost nothing to do there, and there's no nightlife whatsoever. And it was very interesting to me that I would find myself wanting to come back to a boring place just so that I don't have to deal with radical, resentful antics on the part of people in Denver. And so that's one of the reasons why I first read The Road to Wigan Pier, which is a book by Orwell, and it dawned on me at some point, because when I was going up to Denver, I was thinking that these are people who I hypothetically, politically agree with. And when I come down to conservative Colorado Springs, I don't agree with anybody there. But once I read Road to Wigan Pier, I realized, oh, radical lefts, they don't like the poor. They don't love the poor. They're not trying to be helpful to the poor. They just hate the rich. That's the only difference. And so it's a very famous psychologist once said, I'm not interested in the way that you speak or how you speak. I'm not interested in what you say or what you say or what you say you think. I'm interested in how you act. And by that metric, by that lens, if you pass that over socialism, you begin to understand why this doctrine has been so unbelievably murderous, is because it's a doctrine that comes from hate and resent. It doesn't come from love of the working class. It doesn't come from, well, we just want to be nice to everybody and everything is happy-go-lucky utopia. it comes from a very, very dark place of the human heart, and that's why it's always catastrophic what it does to people. So after reading more and more about socialism, about Karl Marx and fascism, I started to become a little bit more. I'd say I became a little bit more philosophically inclined. I like to make philosophical arguments because I'm not a very technically minded person. But what really got me invested in politics is my roommate, my best friend at the time. He was telling me about how poisonous feminism was. And so he and I would randomly go on these bouts of these attacks on feminism, and we'd be bouncing all this whining and bitching off of each other. Oh my gosh, feminism doesn't make any sense in 2018. Like, these dumb girls need to get over themselves, to say the least. And so feminism is actually what got me started with this, because it is very easy to point out the hypocrisy and the holes in people's arguments with feminism. And then I stumbled onto the Black Lives Matter movement, and the Black Lives Matter movement was even more a house of cards. And then after the Black Lives Matter movement, I went on to transgenderism, and transgenderism is the house of cards if there was ever a house of cards. And so I eventually started to know that I started to learn that there were very evil things going on in our politics, and we're getting pretty damn close to the collapse of America. Almost like it feels like America's this big ripe apple, and it's being eaten by the worms from inside of it, and that apple can be plucked at any time by the radical left. And that frightens me. It frightens me a lot, because as a minority, I specifically have an interest in the Republic of America because I want to be seen as an individual. I don't want my minority status weaponized and then used against me into accepting a doctrine that has nothing to do with my values. It has nothing to do with what made America so wealthy and so great to begin with. And I'd say that's my story. I suppose another thing to mention would be that I am proletariat. I'm just a little till I finish school, so it shouldn't. How much money you make shouldn't determine your values. It shouldn't. Just because I don't make that much money doesn't mean that I want to take somebody else's money. That's a line that isn't supposed to be crossed. And the left seems to think that as long as you can rationalize and make excuses and profess to be some avatar of moralist purity, then you're able to invoke tyranny and oppress people into subscribing to your doctrine and your interpretation of the world, and that's just not fair. That's exactly what the left claims to fight against when they fight against Christianity.